Ready?
That's right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'd like to get started. Welcome. My name is Brian Paul, if we haven't met, and I am the president of this Federalist Society chapter. Today's speaker is Josh Blackman. Josh is an associate professor of law at the Houston College of Law. He specializes in constitutional law, U.S. Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. Josh is the author of the critically acclaimed Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. He spoke about that with us a couple years ago. And now he's the author of his latest book, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power.
On sale on Tuesday.
Which we'll be talking about today. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. Josh has testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration. He's an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He's the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the Internet's premier, it has to be only, Supreme Court fantasy.
It is now. We had competition, but they fell off.
Okay, good.
Couldn't stand the chance.
And he also blogs at joshblackman.com. Please welcome Josh Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be back in Indianapolis. This is my third time here. I spoke yesterday in Bloomington and at McKinney, and now I'm at my good friends with the Lawyers chapter. So you're in for a treat. My book is actually being released on Tuesday, so you are my guinea pigs of sorts. This is my first run through this presentation. But I think you will enjoy it. The book is called Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And it tells the story of Obamacare's second act. My first book was called Unprecedented, and that discussed the Supreme Court's decision in NFIB v. Sibelius. This book at a high level talks about three major cases. Hobby Lobby, King v. Burwell, this was the tax subsidy litigation, and the Little Sisters of the Poor against Burwell. And I divided the book up chronologically to 8 different parts. And this will walk you through basically the entire life and perhaps the death of Obamacare, as it were. Our story actually begins a long time ago, way back in 1993, when then First Lady Hillary Clinton proposed the Health Security Act. People remember this? When I do this in college campuses, no one knows what this is anymore. I vaguely recall this, but I trust you, it happened. What killed Hillary Care? Now, this is a harder trivia question. Who knows what this picture's from? TV ad. Do you remember what it was called? Do you remember? What was it about?
It was a couple discussing Americans, and I can't remember their names.
Harry and Louise.
Harry and Louise.
There it is, right? So, yeah, exactly. Outlaws indeed. So, the Harry and Louise commercials were aired in 93 and 94, and they were meant to scare people that this new Hillary Care, this healthcare system was bad. But people don't remember what this campaign was about. Why was Hillary Care bad? This couple said, wait a minute, I like my doctor. I want to keep my doctor. I like my insurance. I want to keep my insurance. I don't want some bureaucrat telling me what kind of insurance I can have. And you know what? This worked. Before Obamacare, roughly 80% of Americans were happy with their health insurance. A lot of people who had it were generally happy with it. They also thought, well, maybe we need to improve it. So here is the healthcare paradox, right? It's a little triangle, if you will. Health insurance can't be everything. You have 3 different factors. It can be affordable, comprehensive, or accessible. Pick 2, you can't have all 3. If you want it to be affordable, it can't be very comprehensive. If you want it to be available to everyone, it will not be cheap. You can only have 2 at a time. Therefore, whenever you try to reform health insurance and make it more comprehensive, you're going to make it less affordable. This is simple economics. You cannot avoid this simple paradox. So President Obama had this understanding. Hillary Care was defeated because people thought that they would lose the cheap plans they liked. So how did he resolve that dilemma? The promise. A promise he repeated nearly 36 times. Everyone, repeat after me. If you like your plan, You can keep your plan. Right. He said it nearly 36 times. Now, it's very easy for us to say now, oh, he was, saying this to sell the law and whatever else. But it's actually even worse than this. At the very time that the president was repeating this promise over and over and over again, his administration was issuing regulations making it harder to keep your plan. His regs shrunk the grandfather provision. His regs made it harder. Why? He wanted everyone to have these gold-plated insurance plans that had all this comprehensive coverage, and they weren't suited for what people actually needed. This is why Obamacare got passed, my friends. Without this promise, Obamacare was dead on arrival. Why? The same thing that killed Hillary Care would have killed this. People would want to keep the plans they had. Now, years later, we realize this was an absolute lie. In fact, it was deemed the lie of the year. But at the time, people believed him. We were naive. It was 2009. We didn't know what the heck we were getting ourselves into. This is way back when. So the ACA managed to pass the Senate. The bill itself was nearly 3,000 pages. No one read it. In fact, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Max Baucus, who was the head of this bill, said, I don't read this. I have better things to do with my time. Well, okay. But the bill passed with a straight party line vote in the Senate. 60 votes Democratic. Not a single Republican voted for this bill in the Senate. But then something crazy happened, which you may recall. Senator Ted Kennedy passed away, and he was replaced by Scott Brown. Scott Brown was a Republican from Massachusetts who took Kennedy's seat. And with the election of Scott Brown, what happened? The Democrats lost their 60-vote block. They can no longer they can no longer beat a filibuster of the ACA. So you had this bill passed that no one actually bothered reading, that passed the Senate. So what happens next? Well, you say the House has to vote on it. So this was up to Speaker Pelosi. And at the time, the Democrats had a huge majority in the House. John Boehner could only look at these piles of paper. And the bill passed. Now, I want you to look at this slide. This is from C-SPAN very closely. You have 34 Democrats vote against the bill. How many Republicans vote for it? Move it quickly enough, I can make a zero. Zero. Not a single Republican voted for this law. Now, you can look at this a couple different ways, right? On the first hand, you say, well, wait a minute, these Republicans, they were being intransigent. They were being obstructionists. Why didn't they support this amazing, awesome law? I take a slightly different perspective. This was a law that half the country didn't want. And only by virtue of the Democratic filibuster was able to get, the filibuster-proof majority, did it get through. The ACA's never went above a 50% popularity rating. So Republicans have nothing to do with this law. They've invested nothing in it, and they had no problem with trying to repeal it every 5 seconds, as it turned out to be. Didn't work. So the bill went to the White House. President Obama signed it. You can see here there are 23 pens. What he does is he signs a signature, a different part of a signature with each pen, and he hands these out as tokens of appreciation. And this was March 23rd, 2010, and he's thinking, man, I got my legacy set. Obamacare is going to be awesome. The battle over this law is over. Everything's cool. Not so fast. Because within minutes of the president signing the ACA into law, a wave of constitutional challenges were waged against the ACA. These were the subject of my first book, Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge for Obamacare. It's on sale on Amazon for like $15, so you can get it cheap. What was the major issue in the Obamacare cases? Well, could Congress compel you to buy health insurance? Right? The individual mandate says you have to have insurance. They make you buy it. Or as Justice Scalia famously put it, can Congress make you buy broccoli? Broccoli will make you healthy. Ultimately, to my heartbreak, the court, by the vote of the Chief Justice, upheld the individual mandate, not as a regulation of commerce, but as a tax. Now, Congress did not call it a tax, but the Chief Justice said, I will treat it as a tax to save the law, or he performed some surgery on the Constitution. So this was the prelude to what comes in the next book. Shortly after the ACA was upheld, Mitt Romney, remember him, said, I am going to repeal and replace Obamacare. That promise was always illusory because in Massachusetts, he basically created it. He imposed a mandate upon the people of Massachusetts, so he had zero credibility. And at a debate, Obama said, "You are the godfather of Obamacare." So Mitt Romney was utterly ineffective at going against the ACA. And as we all know, he did not win the election. Here is President Obama's second swearing in. I would love to hear what he and the chief had to say. It's like, thanks, buddy. But we'll never know that conversation. So this is where my first book left off. And I thought, okay, at this point, Obamacare is pretty much settled. There's not going to be much more controversy. Not so fast. The second phase of the ACA story focuses on religious liberty and the contraceptive mandates. So I want to go back to when the ACA was being debated. And you may remember the biggest controversy was over funding of abortion. This is Representative Bart Stupak, who's a pro-life Democrat from Michigan. And the biggest controversy was, will Obamacare fund abortion? And eventually President Obama signed this executive order, which said, we will not change any law and we won't fund abortions. Now, for those of you who've actually taken common law, an executive order is worthless. It can be repealed in 1 second and has zero weight. You can't have any reliance on it. But this persuaded these pro-life Democrats, and the ACA had enough votes to pass. Okay, that was the big religious controversy that went nowhere. There was a much more subtle controversy that no one even paid attention to. This was something called the Women's Health Amendment, sponsored by Senator Mikulski of Maryland. Now, I'm going to blow your minds, okay? There is no contraceptive mandate in the Affordable Care Act. Huh? The ACA, thing that Congress voted on, does not have a contraceptive mandate. I told you to blow your minds. So what are Hobby Lobby and the Little Sisters fighting over? A regulation. This is the actual statute, and it's a little small, but we can read the bottom. All that Congress said was that with respect to women, such additional preventive care and screenings shall be provided. Congress did not say a word about contraceptives. All they said were, for women, preventive care. They did not define that term. And for those of you who take administrative law, you know that when Congress leaves a term ambiguous, they leave it up to, They leave it up to the agency. Oh, that's not good. I knocked out my own cable. They leave it up to the agency to interpret. Let's see if that goes back on. Yeah. Good. So, there is no actual contraceptive mandate in the ACA. But, as I'm sure you also know, this is a wink and a nod. Congress knew that if we put language in there requiring nuns to buy the morning after pill, that may be controversial, right? That may be controversial. So let's put in this ambiguous term that doesn't mean anything. What's preventive care? Like a mammogram, right? Just, ovarian cancer screening? I mean, that's, I think, preventive care is. No. Preventive means preventing pregnancy, apparently. They put this in. HHS dutifully said, okay, we'll ask our people in this Health Research Services Agency to interpret it. Then they asked this other group, Institute of Medicine, can you interpret this? And, this entire preordained process yielded a result. Preventive care means all FDA-approved contraceptive methods for women. All of them. That includes not only things like condoms and, the birth control pill, but also the morning after pill. So-called emergency contraceptives, which some groups call abortifacients. So now, under the ACA, this is an actual advertisement. This was actually put out by a government agency in Colorado, and I'll read it for you, for those of you who can't see the back. It says, let's get physical. OMG, that's oh my God. OMG, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as his birth control. My health insurance covers a pill, which means all I have to worry about is getting between him and the covers. I got insurance. This was an actual ad put out by the government in Colorado. I swear I'm not making this up. So I suppose it's awesome that these young millennials can get free birth control from their employers, except when we think about who has to pay for it, such as orders of nuns, like the Little Sisters of the Poor. Now, remarkably, when Congress passed this law, they didn't create any sort of conscience clause, right? With the individual mandate, for example, they said if you have a religious objection to insurance, you don't have to pay for your insurance. But with this provision, there was total silence. They said nothing about the conflict of mandate. So everyone, even this order of nuns, would have been bound under the terms of the ACA. You imagine this may have been controversial, making nuns pay for the morning after pill. That was the Obama administration's original plan. Houses of worship were exempt, religious charities were not. So after a series of regulations that went over and over again, eventually they said, okay, if you are a religious charity, you're not required to pay for contraceptives, but we have to use your plan, right? You don't have to pay for it, but we will use your plan to distribute these products. As you can imagine, the religious organizations were not too happy about that, and they objected to it. But the first wave of litigation, and what really begins the second wave of ACA cases, is the Hobby Lobby case. Okay? But things don't always move in sequence. So as these religious liberty cases were bubbling up, the big shutdown came. Okay? This was the ACA itself. And I thought that after Mitt Romney lost the election, I thought that, the attempts to repeal Obamacare would finish. I was wrong. So during the summer of 2014, you may remember these commercials, my senator from Texas, a former, still current Federal Society member, Ted Cruz, was on TV every 5 seconds calling on people to call Congress and say, defund Obamacare, right? This was the plan. They realized, we can't repeal Obamacare, but let's stop the budget, right? Let's not fund the government if it funds Obamacare. And Ted Cruz barnstormed the country, going from city to city, telling people we need to defund Obamacare. And he was joined by his fellow Senator Mike Lee. Now, how can a single senator force this issue? Here was a strategy. On September 30th, 2013, the funding, the budget, would run up. Congress needed to pass a new budget. On October 1st, 2013, Obamacare would open for business. So on the same day that the funding for the government ended, Obamacare started. So Cruz and others had to get, wait a minute, let's prevent funding for the government if it's including Obamacare. That was the plan. Now, I want to disabuse you of one notion. You've probably all seen this picture, right? Senator Cruz, who's an oratorical master, nothing else, he's a lot else, waged, a 23-hour filibuster against Obamacare. But it wasn't actually a filibuster. The reason why is a filibuster means you keep talking until you can't stand anymore. The time when Cruz was on the floor, there was a vote planned. So Ted Cruz could not delay by a minute when that vote would be held. His speech had to end at noon, no matter what he did. So in that sense, you filibuster with a little asterisk next to it, right? It wasn't really a filibuster. So it's, people often say, oh, Ted Cruz shut down the government with his filibuster. It's not true. The vote happened when it was going to happen. But Ted Cruz did spend 23 hours explaining why Obamacare was bad and why it should be defunded. One of my personal favorites, a highlight, was that he read to his daughters, Carolyn and Catherine, the book Green Eggs and Ham on the Senate floor. And if you look closely for those who are from Texas, there's a "Come and Take It" lapel pin, which was a very fitting image. And you can see he's very composed here, right? Look, the tie's off, right? He's looking a little haggard, but he kept going and going and going. And after 23 hours, he emerged. Not quite sure exactly what it accomplished in the short term, but it galvanized the House of Representatives who also oppose Obamacare. And with that, neither house was able to reach a budgetary compromise. So about a week later, we had the barricades. Remember the barricades? We had a government shutdown. Now, in most states, people don't know what that means. Federal government shutdown. What do we even care? But in Washington, D.C., that's a big deal. And what they did was shut down all the national parks, including the World War II memorials. Well, the veterans on the honor flight could go to the national malls, see their memorials. We're not too happy about this. They would simply take the barricades and drop them at the White House. And they made their way. So for about a couple of weeks, the U.S. government was shut down. We had no parks were open. But during this time, we had this compromise, right? We had this impending rush of Obamacare and the debt ceiling. And eventually, as you perhaps anticipated, the Republicans caved. And they not only funded Obamacare and funded the government, but they also got rid of the sequester. This was an absolute train wreck, quite literally, for Republicans because they got nothing out of it. Absolutely nothing. It was a debacle. And because of this government shutdown, it also distracted from what was the next major flaw in Obamacare, the website. So did anyone have to go to healthcare.gov in 2013 or 14? Did anyone try? See, you're all employed, right? Well, just as students, they have different answers. They're on their parents' plan until they're 40. But you all have jobs, so you don't have to worry about this. But the healthcare.gov website was an utter and absolute train wreck. On the same day the government shut down, healthcare.gov opened. Or did it? It didn't quite open because the thing didn't work. They had spent hundreds of millions of dollars building a website that was utterly incapable of doing anything. It became a nightmare for the government. And for basically weeks at a time, the website was down. You couldn't go there. You couldn't buy a policy. You would sit there waiting forever to try and get your Obamacare. But as all good things come to an end, the present launch was called the tech surge. You imagine, people storming the beaches of Normandy, right, in these boats with laptops and iPhones. It was actually 5 people from Google and Facebook who came and fixed the entire thing. What a couple engineers did from Silicon Valley, the entire federal bureaucracy couldn't do in a year, which is remarkable. So eventually, they tried a different go on after Thanksgiving, and it wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough that people were now able to purchase policies on the exchange. But at the same time, the next major crisis hit. These were the waves of cancellations. Now, did anyone get a letter like this in the mail? You got one of these? Weren't too happy you got it, were you? No, we're happy, sir? No. So about the number's hard to pin down, but it's probably about 3 or 4 million Americans got a letter similar to this in the mail, which says, because of the new healthcare law, your plan is canceled. Wait a minute, didn't Obama tell us that we can keep our plans? Well, this was in fact voted by PolitiFact the lie of the year. The reason why this lie was so insidious was not just for harming people like these two gentlemen. His administration passed all these regulations, making it harder to renew your plan. So at the same time he was sitting there saying, "Oh, you can keep your plan," he was passing a reg saying, "Oh no, you can't." This was how Obamacare was passed. Without this promise, it would never pass, and it was an absolute lie. He never truly apologized for it. He simply said, well, the reason why your plan is getting canceled is because the insurance companies. Yeah, blame the insurance companies. Oh, it's what you wanted to do. So now you had all these millions of people who are out of insurance. And Obama said, well, you know what? You don't have any insurance? Go buy a new plan, right? Enroll on Obamacare. Go to the website, healthcare.gov. For the first few months, it was tough to run because the website didn't operate. But come 2014, remarkably, they managed to enroll about 8 million people by April of 2014, which was, to put in perspective, remarkable in light of how the law started. The number actually wasn't that high. One of the things we found with Obamacare is that people who sign up don't actually pay their bills. Okay, listen to this. Hear me out. What they do is they sign up for insurance, get treatment, and then cancel their coverage and never pay their bills. Good luck collecting $200,000 for chemotherapy from someone who doesn't have any money. So basically, the people who are signing up and canceling it are reasons why prices are going so high. The insurers are saying people are not being subjected to the mandate. People are not being subjected to the penalty. They're going in, getting the treatment, going out. And because of various special enrollment periods, you can literally buy insurance on the way to the hospital, right? If you call the government and say, I lost my job, say, okay, you can go sign up right now. Or if you call the government and say, well, I had a hardship, bad things at work, well, yeah, here, we'll give you a special enrollment window. They're recently trying to clamp down on these because this is what's driving prices sky high. But for the first 3 years, most people, maybe 6 million actually paid the premiums throughout the entire year. And then they drop their coverage afterwards. So the numbers you see are actually somewhat misleading. And it doesn't count for the millions of people who lost coverage they like, or who perhaps still have coverage, but their premiums increased, their deductibles increased, their networks shrank, coverage shrank. So it's very hard to measure the actual impact of Obamacare. And I encourage you, don't just look at this 8 million number and think everything's hunky-dory. There's a lot more to it than that. Okay? Before we move on, we come back to religious liberty. And we have to talk about a law from 1993 called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. There was a Supreme Court case from the early 1990s involving a Native American, a guy named Al Smith. And Al Smith, as a Native American, used peyote, right? You know what this is. This is like this cactus hallucinogen. I won't ask if anyone's ever used it, but this stuff can be used as a drug. It's also used as a sacrament in certain Native American ceremonies. Mr. Smith was fired from his job, and he tried to apply for unemployment. The government said, we will not give you unemployment because you were a drug user, right? We're not going to reward you. You were terminated for this use of drugs. Went up to the Supreme Court. A decision by Justice Scalia, no less, said, well, this is fine. Because this law is general, it applies to everyone equally, right? No one can sue the government for this. If you're fired for using drugs and drugs are illegal, that's too bad if that's what your religion requires. This case was very unpopular. So unpopular that barely a year later, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. Can you imagine that? That's a young Orrin Hatch and a young Chuck Schumer overlooking a signing of a bill. Can you imagine even happening today? I can't. But what RFRA basically said was if the federal government wants to burden your religion, they have to have a very good reason for doing so. And they have to do so very narrowly. This is what we talk about tailoring. So if the government wants to censor your faith, they have to do it very narrowly. Now, in a case called Bernie against Flores, this involved a church in San Antonio that tried to expand, get a zoning permit to expand. The city denied it. The Supreme Court struck down RFRA as applied to state governments, but it still applied to the federal government. And this was a law that was cited by Hobby Lobby to challenge the contraceptive mandate. Now, how does this law work? Hobby Lobby will be required to pay for the entire range of birth control. Now, Hobby Lobby didn't object to all of them. They only objected to birth control as they deemed abortifacients. These are things that can, let me be very precise, after the embryo is fertilized that can prevent implantation. I won't draw you a picture, but you can use your imagination, right? Hobby Lobby only objected to post-fertilization contraceptives, such as the morning after pill, Plan B as it's called. Hobby Lobby started as a small business, a husband and wife making picture frames. And they started to grow and grow and grow until they have, stores nationwide. They have Hobby Lobby in Indiana? Yeah, they got them everywhere. A funny story, so for my first book, I mailed a copy of my book to all the justices, and they all mailed me nice letters back. So I had the letters framed from the justices at Hobby Lobby. So this letter from Sonia Sotomayor framed in a Hobby Lobby frame, which it's a little sense of irony. The clerk at Hobby Lobby laughed. But this company, though it's nationwide, is a closely held company. It's not publicly traded. The board of directors is basically a family. This looks like a nice, Easter card, but it's also the board of directors. All the members of this family are owners of the company. They all share the same religion. They all share the same faith. So this company truly does have a religious identity. This is not Exxon or Chevron that has, thousands of shareholders across the world. This is it. This is the company. And every member of the board agrees that this contraceptive mandate violates their conscience as a corporation. Now, again, they only objected to these 4 specific products. This case was challenged up to the Supreme Court. And this case raised a host of issues about religious liberty, not the least of which corporate personhood, right? How can a corporation exercise religion? I think this is something of a red herring. People get together to exercise religions all the time. If any of you are a member of a church, I promise you your church is a corporation. Your church is incorporated under the laws of Indiana. If you have a religious charity, it's incorporated. The Little Sisters of the Poor, a corporation. The mere fact that you choose to use the corporate shield for your entity does not deprive you of religiosity. So that's much of a red herring. Indeed, only 2 justices, Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor, said corporations can never have religious exercise, which is insane if you think that churches are actually corporations. So the case was appealed to the Supreme Court, and it became a culture war issue. And I love the signs that are always protesters bring outside the Supreme Court. This one's one of my favorites. It says, if men can get pregnant, birth control will be from gumball machines and be bacon flavored. And this one, my mom's not ready to be a grandma. Yeah. Some other signs, this is not a church, and this is not a healthcare plan. This woman dressed up like a pack of birth control pills, which was very creative. It's like, Skittles or M&Ms or something. I can't talk about Skittles now. Skittles are whoever is the marketing director for Skittles right now probably hates himself. This is one of my favorite signs. Hey, Supreme Court, no bosses in my bedroom. I think Hobby Lobby would agree with this. They don't want to be in your bedroom. They don't want to fund what's in your bedroom. So this sign, I think, has different interpretations. Contraception is my business. I think Hobby Lobby would agree with that. Pay for it yourself, they would say. Corporations are not people. This was my favorite one. She actually crocheted a uterus out of pink crochet yarn. I'm fairly certain she bought this thread at Joann's and a Hobby Lobby, but I wasn't able to find out. There's actually a pattern you can buy online of how to make basically little pigtails, whatever, right? Keep your hobbies off my ovaries. That's a good sign. And so the conservative protesters never have good signs. They're never as creative. These guys were there with their kilts and their bagpipes. I have no idea. Whatever, right? Liberal signs are always better. They have more creativity, more time, less employment, so they have more time to do these sorts of, with markers and stuff. So this case was argued. Paul Clement, the attorney, argued for the Hobby Lobby Corporation, and Solicitor General Verrilli argued for the government. And this was a 5-4 decision, shockingly. The majority opinion by Justice Alito said very simply that corporations can have religious identities, and that this is clearly a substantial burden. You are making them pay for a product that they find sinful. It's hard to think of a more clear violation of religious liberty, short of actually making the Green family take the morning after pill. I think that would probably be even more egregious. Making them pay for it, the court said, was along the same levels. But who was in dissent? Our favorite, the notorious RBG. If you want to trace a moment of when Justice Ginsburg went off the rails, this was it. After the Hobby Lobby decision, she became a cultural icon. And I think it really went to her head. And her hubris in the past couple of years has been, frankly, stunning. I'll also give you a pro tip. Justice Ginsburg wears these little collars around her neck. They call it jabots. It's a French word. This is her dissenting collar. So if you're ever in court and you see Justice Ginsburg wearing this, she's about to give a big dissent. I swear, I was in the court about a month or two ago, whenever it was, and I was like, "Oh, she got a dissenting jabot. Good, we're okay." Because I was waiting for a decision. Like, "Oh, she's dissent. That's fine." But Ginsburg, after this, really went off the rails, and I think she got a little too full of herself. But she argued that this is a minefield, that this is bad for women, that this is discriminatory, and she said that corporations, no matter what form, can never have any religious exercise. Okay, so that was the first decision in the Hobby Lobby case. All these people are celebrating. This little girl blowing kisses. It's not the best image for Team Life, but I'll take it. This was only the first Supreme Court case. We have 2 more. I promise we'll get it in time. I'm right on schedule. The next case involved tax subsidies. When the ACA was first being debated, the plan was that all 50 states would create these exchanges that allowed you to buy health insurance. That turned out not to work. Only 14 states decided to build their own online exchanges. Indiana, as you can see, decided not to build its own exchange. Why is this a problem? Because the Affordable Care Act has its provisions. It says, okay, all states must establish exchanges. Okay. Government can't make you do something. So what happens if a state fails to establish an exchange? The secretary shall establish and operate such exchange within the state. So if the state doesn't make one, the feds step in and do a fallback exchange. Okay, no problem there, right? The problem arises with this provision. I know this is small, so I'll read it for you. Subsidies are only available in an exchange established by the state. Wait a minute. Subsidies, it says, are only available in an exchange established by the state. What about a federal exchange? That was the basis of the next round of challenges. Okay? If you only have subsidies in a state-run exchange, how can there be subsidies in the federalhealthcare.gov? And I'll spare you the language. But this was the next Supreme Court case. So it was a case brought by Jacqueline Halbig and another guy named King. And they challenged this, saying, look, the government can't be paying out all this money. This is illegal. Millions and millions of dollars of subsidies are illegal. This created a circuit split. The D.C. Circuit ruled for the challengers. The Fourth Circuit ruled for the government. What happens? Again, it goes to the Supreme Court. Once again, conservative signs are usually very boring. Obamacare's IRS mandate's illegal. I didn't like the IRS. The other side had much more effective signs. If the court ruled against the government here, people in about, 36 states would lose their subsidies. Obamacare without subsidies is unaffordable. You can't afford it. It's too much money. So people that had these signs that were very effective. In Tennessee, 300,000 people lose their coverage. In New Jersey, 200,000. In Wisconsin, 300,000. If the court ruled against the government, these subsidies would end and people would lose their coverage. The case was argued. Mike Carvin argued for the challengers. And as history played out, by a 6-3 vote, the Chief Justice ruled in favor of the government. The Chief Justice said, even though this text seems to say that you only get subsidies on the state exchanges, this can't be the right answer. Why? The purpose of the ACA was to improve health insurance, not to destroy it. And we have to read the ACA with that purpose in mind. The purpose of the ACA, I see people rolling their eyes. The purpose of the ACA is to improve health insurance, not destroy it. Justice Scalia issued what would become his last dissent from the bench. The justices, if they're really pissed off, they read their dissent from the bench. And Nino said, we have a special set of rules for the ACA. We have a special set of rules for this law. And the rule is the ACA must be saved. Scalia said, we should perhaps call this law SCOTUS care. That now this is no longer the law of Congress, but it's a law of the Supreme Court of the United States. And by vote 6-3, they upheld it. And this was basically the blessing of the Supreme Court saying we are not going to stop the ACA. We're not done, folks. The last major case, which was kind of decided a few months ago, was involving the Little Sisters of the Poor. This is an order of nuns, and their mission in life is to care for the sick and the elderly. These are some pretty amazing people. After the case was argued, I had the opportunity to have lunch with a bunch of them. And I felt like I was in a casting call for The Sound of Music. There were nuns everywhere. It was beautiful. How do you solve a problem like Scalia? I don't know. But unfortunately, Justice Scalia was not there when the case was argued. When the case was granted, Scalia was still with us. And then his untimely passing meant the justices were down to 8 for the resolution of this case. This is my favorite sketches. This is the Supreme Court cafeteria. And you have the nuns having breakfast in the Supreme Court cafeteria. They managed to get seats. And in the courtroom, you had all these people in the garb and the robes walking around the Supreme Court. It was something of a surreal sight to think about. This case was argued by Noel Francisco. And I was there. I was actually sworn into the Supreme Court bar that day. Fortuitous timing. So I was able to get a seat in the front row. I was sitting literally 5 feet from Paul Clement, which is pretty cool to see him operate up close. The arguments were frankly divided. The justices seemed to agree that their plans were getting hijacked, that the Obama administration was basically hijacking the Little Sisters plans and using it to distribute these various forms of contraceptives. So what happened? Afterwards, the nuns walked down the steps. It was one of the most amazing scenes I've ever been at the Supreme Court. You had basically hundreds of nuns standing on the sidewalks of the court, cheering and screaming for these Little Sisters. It was really weird because usually in a Supreme Court case, the plaintiffs don't matter, right? Who cares about Hobby Lobby? Right? Who cares about the company? But these charismatic nuns really captured the attention of the Supreme Court that day, and they gave a speech. I thought it was very moving. But what happened next was continued to be somewhat unprecedented. A couple of days after the case was argued, the justice assigned some homework. What do you mean they assigned some homework? They asked for supplemental briefing. Now, if you guys are practicing lawyers, the worst thing ever is supplemental briefings. That means either you didn't do a good enough job or they can't decide the case, right? That's always your red flag. So the supplemental briefing said, well, I know you guys said this is how you want to provide the contraceptives. Is there some other way you can do it? Like some other way that won't violate religious liberty? Like give us something, anything, maybe this or that. So the government wrote back, and the challengers wrote back basically saying, no. we would have thought of it if we could. The solution the court proposed may work for some groups, but not others. I will not bore you with ERISA, but unfortunately, this entire case turns on ERISA, of how you interpret retirement and security plans. It's awful. But based on the nuance of ERISA, for example, the Little Sisters, the solution works for them. They can actually get out scot-free. But for other groups, they can't. So the court said, can you maybe try this? And they said, no, it won't work. Okay, so what happened? About a month later, the court comes in. The Chief Justice announced, we have a decision in Zubik, or the Little Sisters case. We're not actually deciding the case. Here's what the court did. They said, well, we asked for this extra briefing, and the party said, well, maybe we can do something else. I don't know. So the court remanded now to 4 separate courts of appeal saying, you guys go figure this out. We only have 8 justices. You lower court judges, you figure this out. We don't have to deal with this now. Their supplemental briefing resolved nothing. There's a serious gap between the parties, right? The government says you need to provide the contraceptives on the same plan. The plaintiffs say, no, don't use our plan, go use some other plan. Let them get a separate card, like you have dental insurance, get a separate card for that. Or let these women go on the Obamacare exchanges and buy their own plan. The government says, no, that's not seamless. It's too much of a burden to have to go buy a separate plan. We don't want that. So we're stuck in the situation where the nuns have, at the minimum, a temporary victory. The good part is they did not lose. Right? They didn't quite win, but they didn't lose. This case is now being sent back to, I think, 4, maybe even 5 courts of appeals now. And maybe when there's a 9th justice, whoever the heck it's going to be, we will have a decision. But, my friends, this is not done. And I'll close on this note. As I said, my first book was called Unprecedented. The second book was called Unraveled. Eventually, I'll finish the trilogy. It'll be called Undone. Whether we have a Donald Trump or a Hillary Clinton presidency, it doesn't much matter. The ACA, as it stands now, is not sustainable. And the reason why I know this is because both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have said we need a public option. Now, what's a public option? A government plan to compete with private insurers. So if you go into healthcare.gov and you're in a county with 1 or maybe 0 plans from your insurance company, you go buy a government plan instead. This is not a solution. I've seen it described as a Trojan horse with windows in it, so you can see inside. This is a gateway to a single-payer healthcare system. There's no doubt that if you are a government plan, you can price have competition to anyone else. The insurance companies know this. They can't go against the government. The government can say, okay, we'll use taxpayer dollars to subsidize it. We don't have to compete on price. This happened much quicker than I thought. When I wrote my first book, I thought, well, maybe in 10 years we'll have this implosion. It didn't even take 3 years for the thing to unravel. Not even 3 years. And they're already talking about single payer. Public option. 3 years. This is an ongoing story, and I'll probably be talking about this for the next year or so. So you're getting the pre-election version, and I'll probably do a post-election version eventually, whether it's a Trump or a Clinton White House. But the fact of the matter is, the ACA, as it was designed, hasn't succeeded. It was designed to be this dynamic, stable marketplace where everyone can get insurance with lots of choice and low prices. Not even 3 years in, that math failed. So now it's like putting, fancy new tires on a beat-up old bicycle. It's not going to improve the mechanics of this device. I don't have much optimism, though, because, again, half the Congress wants to get rid of this thing. The other half wants single payer. There's not much of a middle ground. And at this point, you're simply going to limp along with Obamacare until the thing totally implodes. And then, then we'll be stuck with the bill. Thank you all for your attention. I welcome your questions. And that was a good first round. I think that worked pretty good. Thank you so much. I got through everything. I didn't think I would. Thank you. And we have some time. For questions. Thank you.
Got 10 minutes. Questions?
Yes, sir.
Have you analyzed how this relates to the Clara Piven doctrine that
I'm not. What? I don't know what that doctrine is.
Cloward Piven doctrine. Cloward. The second name is Pivan.
What does it state?
They were Columbia University professors. They basically said the way to accomplish the revolution is to have the government make a financial entitlement right in all the have-nots.
So
when it eventually gets to a certain point, the have-nots will bring down the government by violence in the streets because they will be able to go to the streets and say, but we have a right to this.
isn't that Mitt Romney's 47% comment? Right. So I'm not familiar with this doctrine, but I think the short answer is.
Marxist communist.
Oh, well, President Obama has been fond of saying that healthcare is no longer a privilege; it's a right. Well, that's not even entirely true because unless you're on Medicaid, you don't get free health insurance, right? If you're making more than $20,000 a year, you have to pay for it. But I think the biggest deceit of Obamacare is this notion that we have a right to health insurance, but you can also keep the plans that you like. Those are incompatible. If there was a frank conversation that said, all right, everyone, you want to have universal health care coverage? You're going to have to lose your great coverage. Give it to someone else. That conversation was never had. There was a lie told us you can keep yours and make it better for everyone else. So I don't know if we're quite on this Marxist track you described yet, but there's definitely this entitlement sense that people have a right to health insurance, which I think is a fallacy. We don't live in a government of positive rights. Our rights come from our creator, and government's created to secure those rights, not to create them. So I think there's a continued perversion of the moral foundation of our republic. Yes, sir, in the back.
The big conversation now is whether they knew up front that this was going to happen. Then the question is how long would it take for it to happen? That they would say we have to go to single payer or the public option, whichever.
Yeah, I get this. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, let me take just one step further. And the other question is, what do you think the possibilities are of this happening? Does it just depend on this election?
So I get this question a lot, right? Did they intend for this thing to unravel in the span of 3 years? I describe Obamacare as a regulatory leviathan forged from empathy and hubris. I don't think they intended it to implode this quickly. I thought these people like Jonathan Gruber, they're the smartest people in the world, right? If we get the subsidies like this and do the market like this and the exchange like this, we're going to make this perfect thing. F.A. Hayek wrote of a fatal conceit of central planners, right? They think they're so darn smart that they can manage the market. They can't manage the market. No one's smart enough to manage a market. So I think they really thought this would work, at least for the short term, at least for some period of time. It collapsed far ahead of schedule. It didn't even make it through Obama's second term in office. Now, your second question of how long is this going to take to implode? Does it matter what happens in the election? I don't think it matters who gets elected. You're going to continue to see in most states only one insurance provider in certain counties. If you're in a metropolis like Indianapolis or Phoenix, whatever, you're going to have a lot of choice. But if you're living out in suburbia, you're going to have one choice, and it's not going to be enough because you can't control costs. So the movement to have a government option to compete will keep growing and growing and growing. And the way this starts is actually with the states. You'll see states starting to create their own single-payer plans. The Obamacare law actually allows states to opt out of Obamacare so long as they provide something similar. And President Clinton will be all too happy to let California or Colorado make a single-payer plan. At that point, we're toast. If you're in those states and you have a government plan, good luck trying to buy insurance in the individual market. I think your hand was up, sir.
Right. Well, that brings a better point I wanted to ask about. You have some history. You can look at California, for example, early on had their own plan. What's been the result of that?
Well, California doesn't have single payer yet, but I think it was either New Hampshire or Vermont. I'm drawing a blank on which one. Tried it, and their single payer plan imploded in about 3 years. Yeah, I mean, these things. If you think government can manage a website, right? You want government to manage the entire healthcare system, go look at the VA, right? You want to see what a single payer healthcare system looks like? Go look at the VA. It's a travesty, and that'll be for everyone now. Yes, sir, in the green shirt?
Yeah, so it seems like the only limitation on Congress at this point from the courts is RFRA. So you think that if we move to a national system of health care, they'll try to do that and repeal RFRA or carve up RFRA so that the courts...
So the one benefit, this is almost an irony, the Little Sisters and Hobby Lobby tell the government, if you want women to have birth control, pay for it yourself. So if in effect the government started providing free birth control, that would actually limit all these problems. But the government says, we don't want that. We want it to be through your pre-existing plan, not through a separate plan. Your second question about RFRA, I think Brian invited me here to talk about a year or two ago. It didn't work out with Indiana's RFRA. I don't think RFRA is along for this world. I think you're going to see states start repealing their RFRAs, and eventually the federal one will be gone. So long as RFRAs are viewed as licenses to discriminate, which they're simply not, these laws cannot exist. If you look at North Carolina, you're having the NCAA boycott North Carolina. They have competitions in China and Cuba, which is great, where people are forced to be sterilized, but they won't go to North Carolina for a basketball tournament. I saw a hand somewhere over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, two questions. Justice Roberts being from Indiana and a Federalist Society member.
He is not a Federal Society member. In fact, during his confirmation hearing, he denied being a member. Even though his dues were paid, he said the firm paid his dues. So he is not a member in North.
First question would be, why did he change his position? Why do you think he called it tax, not regulation? Second question, besides MedShare, have you seen any private sector alternatives, something that can be offered to solve some of this problem when insurance, the escalation in price?
So thank you. So the first question, if you want to read it, go read my first book. I think the short answer is the Chief Justice felt that it would be bad for the court as an institution to strike down the law. So he decided to uphold it as a tax rather than invalidating it under the Commerce Clause. I've been very critical of that decision. The second question, what you're actually going to start seeing is people dropping insurance altogether and paying cash. So you have things called concierge services. You know about these? Where basically you don't have insurance, you simply pay to be a member of a network, and you pay cash to go see a doctor. And especially if you're younger, that's a good idea. My sister, who's I was 27 or 28 at the time, she lived in New York, and for her to buy the cheapest Obamacare plan, she would basically have to pay almost an $8,000 deductible before she gets the benefit of coverage. So she pays her full premiums and all this money before she gets a single payment. I told her, look, just pay cash, and she didn't listen to me. But for a lot of young people, my students say, listen, I'm just going to take the penalty, take a hit, and if I get sick, I'll pay cash. Other questions? Okay, yes, sir, over there.
Some of the proposed single-payer plans that you're talking about, or that you mentioned, prohibit concierge service that you're talking about?
So, thank you for the question. Let me be more precise. Single payer, literally taken, means private insurance is illegal. So in Canada, until fairly recently, it was illegal to buy private insurance. You couldn't do it. It was illegal. The better model is what the United Kingdom has. They have the national healthcare system, but if you're rich, you can buy private insurance. So single payer, I use the term probably too liberally. It's a misnomer. You can still have private insurance, but you'd also have a national healthcare system. So under these plans that the states can have, they'll say, okay, you can buy Blue Cross, you can buy Cigna, or you can buy Colorado Care, and try and guess which one of those will be cheaper. But again, you'll probably get a Medicaid-like coverage, not very good, poor doctors, poor networks. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you see anything moving now that looks like it has enough specific gravity to go beyond the election and actually happen in terms of the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, changing, eliminating, unraveling, as you said?
Right, yeah. At this point, I think Obamacare's biggest enemy is itself. What's going to happen, you'll see this in the next couple of weeks, is once insurance premiums start coming in, they'll be above rate. The insurance numbers next year will be flat. The number of people who sign up for insurance should be increasing. It's pretty much plateaued. So people are not going on it. And as premiums keep going up, people will drop their coverage. You're going to see, and Hillary Clinton's going to push this if she wins, a serious push for a public option. And say, well, the Democrats won't break a filibuster. I think if Hillary Clinton wins and she has like a 51 vote majority, they'll get rid of the filibuster altogether. I think the Democrats are simply going to go for it and make the Senate a true democracy, which I think would be dangerous. But we'll have a 51 vote to pass whatever they want. The House will probably stay Republican, which complicates that, but eventually I think they'll nuke the filibuster. Okay, last question, sir.
For
Yes.
the original Hillary Care, it was illegal to buy private insurance, right?
Yeah, it was pretty much a pure single payer, and that was an absolute mess. This would be public option, so she would keep private insurance, but there would be something to compete with it from the government. All right, maybe one more question. That was a shorter question than I expected. Anything else? Thank you all so much for your attention. Have a great day. And buy my book, please. Buy a copy.
Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.
That was a good dry run.
Thank you so
Good
much.
job.
Yeah, I made it. I had to rush a little bit, but I think I got it.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.